Oh dear.
Okay. Did she open it on her computer?
What?
Because it said she...
Yeah, she's on.
There we go. There we go. I found the tab. Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Emily. So stay with me if I need any help here for the early part. So I'll go ahead and start since I have the phone right at the moment. My name is Molly McGill. I'm a Deputy Director for the Witchy Cooperative for Educational Technologies. That acronym is WCET. And if I may, there's a television station in Cincinnati whose initials are WCET. We are not that. WCT is based in Boulder, Colorado. We're a national nonprofit membership-based cooperative of higher ed institutions and other organizations, and our goal is to work collectively to improve the quality and the reach of online and hybrid education. So I'm just very happy to be here today and have the great pleasure of working with my two co-presenters, both of whom serve on one of our working groups that deals with academic integrity and student authentication. So Luke, I think it's your turn.
Thank you, Molly. I'm Dr. Luke Dowden. I'm the Director of Distance Learning at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. I'm really glad to be with you today and want to thank WCET for including me in the presentation group and also to Learning House for sponsoring the webinar today. You'll hear a lot more from me later. I'm on the WCET steering committee and a happy member to serve and to share what we're learning through the work of that valuable organization.
I guess it's my turn.
Matt. Mm-hmm.
My name is Matt Prenius. My day job, I'm Assistant Dean at University of Maryland University College. And I manage a unit with about 28,000 enrollments annually. So part of my job is seeing the hardest cases in academic integrity issues. And I'm also a faculty member. So I grapple with all the gray areas that come up in this issue as well. And I've been involved as a participant in WCT since about 2008 now. Originally, I was involved at my institution in piloting several technologies, both for identity authentication and electronic proctoring, which is how I became involved in the issue and have learned an enormous amount working with my colleagues here at WCT. So my job is to kick things off today, and I want to start with just a very high-level overview of the issue and also our presentation today. And so we'll be getting into the details later on in the presentation. Feel free to ask questions as we go, but just know that we're going to get into some of the details later on. And I'm going to start with just the blindingly obvious point that this is a complex issue. And it's... yeah?
Excuse me. We have some feedback that people can't hear so well. Do you mind moving a little closer to your microphone or speaking up just a little bit?
Sure. Maybe it's because I have a standing desk and it's somewhat under the. How's that?
That sounds better to me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anyway, to start with the obvious point that academic integrity is complex, and it's the nature of complex problems that they're nonlinear, that all the parts are interrelated, and also that people don't like complex problems very much. It's much easier to get a hold of a part rather than deal with the whole. And so I'll just advance to the next slide here. The components, looking at academic integrity across the institution, the place to start is really with your institutional culture. You know, we're going to be covering a number of aspects of the issue today, but the place to begin is to think about your policies, your procedures, and where your faculty and student bodies are. It's pretty common in the research that I've seen among institutions when faculty are surveyed that they will have one of the issues that they raise is that they're not always clear about what the policy for the institution is and also what the roles and responsibilities are. Students, it's very easy to make assumptions about students, and I know in my own job now that I tend to see, some of the worst cases, but the vast majority of students are in a different place. We conducted a focus group here at my institution last summer, and it was really kind of eye-opening. It was a focus group of students, and what we learned from students is that the issue of academic integrity was very important to them because, and our student body, we have mostly working adult students, military students, but it was very important to them that their degree has value, and they understood that the perception of the value of the degree by employers was dependent on this issue of integrity. So that is important to students. The problem is the issue of academic integrity is also a complex one because we live in a very dynamic environment. The regulatory environment, as we all know, is dynamic, is changing as the Higher Education Opportunity Act goes through various revisions over the years. The environment for learning is changing very rapidly. MOOCs are very much in the headlines lately, but the technology for learning, the demands in terms of student demographics, issues of cost and accessibility, all these things are changing, and all these things affect the learning environment and therefore affect issues of academic integrity and misconduct. So go to the next slide.
I'm sorry, Matt. I've got it. Hang on.
Now, in this complex and changing environment, the approaches to maintaining academic integrity and dealing with academic misconduct are mostly inherited and mostly haven't changed a great deal in a century. And if you go back over the history of the past century, you can roughly divide approaches into two groups. One is in terms of policing, and this coming out of a 19th century idea of a community of scholars, a kind of guild, policing the boundary through maintaining policy and procedures. Proctoring is something that begins as we move from oral examination to written examination in the 18th and 19th century. And so something like anti-plagiarism software can be applied in a way to enforce policy. There's also been an approach, somewhat more recent, focusing on, I guess, what you could call moral education of students, and that's prevention. And we see this in things such as tutorials, and we use a number in our own institution, instruction on citation, on avoiding plagiarism, honor codes, and in the design of assignments. And go to the next slide. So not so much as an alternative to these approaches, because human nature being human nature, we're always going to need policing. We're always going to need approaches focusing on prevention. Another way of sort of reconceptualizing academic integrity, a supplementary way of reconceptualizing it, is to think about it in terms of student learning. And I find myself going back to this kind of a definition frequently as in my job, you know, if a case with a student is not resolved with the faculty members, not resolved with the program director, it comes to me. And so I find myself in these phone conversations trying to explain why whatever the student has done is problematic. And what I often try to do is, since the P word, as I call it, tends to raise temperatures, is try to put things objectively. And if you think about academic integrity in terms of student learning, you can say that if I, as a faculty member, can reliably assess that you, the student, have learned, there's academic integrity in the system. The problem with misconduct, then, is that it compromises this relationship. It doesn't allow me to reliably say that you, the student, have learned. And so part of our institution-wide definition of academic integrity and misconduct now includes the idea that when students misrepresent their work, faculty cannot provide meaningful feedback needed for ongoing improvement. And the reason this is important, we'll be getting into some of these details later, is that it does have implications for designing assessments, the way in which you design assessments. It has implications in terms of curriculum design, and it has implications in terms of the decisions you make about not only which technologies you're using to support learning, but how you apply them. So with that sort of high-level introduction, I will pass things to Molly to talk about academic dishonesty and fraud.
We actually have a question, Molly, before you get started, where Jeff Alexander asks, could you provide an example of the tutorials you provide students regarding plagiarism? Are all students required to attend the tutorial?
Yes, and I can share a web link with the tutorial that we use at UMUC. There are some other really excellent examples out there, and Molly will be able to point to a couple as well. In terms of how we use the tutorial, yes, we require it now in every course that a student takes, in which there's a significant writing component. The tutorial that we have focuses on issues of plagiarism, and then some of the other disciplines in math and science have a similar kind of tutorial. What I'll say is that one of the problems with this approach, it was great in the first couple of years, is that there's kind of a inoculation mentality. You think, well, students have taken the tutorial, they understand the issues now. That doesn't always work out. The other problem that we run into is that when students take the same tutorial class after class after class, it becomes rather mechanical and probably less effective. But I can share an example after the presentation that can be sent out, so you can take a look at the tutorial that we use here.
And Matt, this is Molly. To the question, we do have a slide toward the end of this presentation that includes some selected references and also some resources. One of the ones that I have linked there is tutorials available for both students and faculty developed by the Colorado Community Colleges Online, CCC Online. And they developed those 2-3 years ago and put them out there and shared them with WCET members to view them, validate them, comment, revise them. And so they're out there, and they say that they are by CCC Online and in collaboration with WCET. But even without our association there, we have heard very good reviews about the comprehensiveness of those tutorials, and so those links will be available on the slide towards the end of this presentation. So I wanted to take just a couple of minutes on this issue of academic dishonesty and fraud. And Matt, I wish I had not used the word dishonesty because I like your term of academic misconduct. But maybe for the purposes of this short discussion about fraud, maybe the dishonesty term is more appropriate. When WCET first formed our working group on academic integrity and student authentication, we were being driven by, back in 2008 when Congress was formulating language aimed at the accrediting associations to ensure that students who were registered for online courses were indeed the students who were taking those classes and getting the credit. And it had more of an issue of who's actually logging into the LMS and taking the classes and getting the credit. Over the last couple of years, kind of like MOOCs hitting the headlines, over the last couple of years, certainly there's been more in the Chronicle of Higher Education and other national media about these fraud rings, or Pell runners, they call them. And so in our own conversations here with our membership, and again, that's kind of one of the roles of WCET, is to track issues that our institutions are needing to face and trying to cut through some of the noise and do an interpretation or provide information that will be helpful for all of you to understand of what's important, where some of these issues are going. So from the literature, I did pull out some definitions of academic dishonesty, cheating, obviously we use that a lot, plagiarism, fabrication. I think that in terms of that one, and one of the sources that I cited down there where I pulled some of this information, one might put faking your sources or data in a lab report, etc. You might put that into the cheating bucket. Facilitation speaks to the issue of it's just not always the student who is getting their a friend to take a test for them. It might be that friend who's actually very willingly knowing that they are doing something outside of an academic integrity environment by volunteering to write that paper for someone else. I put in bold there misrepresentation, and again from this document dealing with academic dishonesty, one of the examples that they had in that document was an example of misrepresentation would be a student, for example, lying about being ill or lying about an absence. When we talk about a criminal activity such as we've seen in the past few years of some students defrauding the federal government of millions of financial aid dollars, well, you might call it misrepresentation, but for our purposes, we're taking it kind of out of that bucket and viewing it more from a criminal activity. So if the motivation, and one of the reasons for really viewing it separately, is that the motivations of the students are so different, and certainly the solutions are very different. If you're out to defraud for financial gain versus a student motivation to just get a good grade on a test. So certainly I have here one of the cases that broke in, I believe it was 2008, was one case found in Arizona, and it was one ringleader and 4 co-conspirators, and over a period of time they had defrauded the government of over $500,000. That did get investigated by the Department of Education Office of the Inspector General, and that person was prosecuted. I understand from some institutions that are dealing with these issues that the Department of Ed does have well over 100 investigations, at any given year into where there have been reports submitted by institutions of some suspicious behavior. The second bullet there about what the Department of Education does require institutions to do, I believe this language is currently there that indicates that institutions do have to have systems in place to resolve these discrepancies. I'll have another slide here on the next one that, as I understand, the department is putting forward even further guidance for institutions where they do believe that they have some instances of financial aid fraud occurring. So this is a real and significant issue. Community colleges tend to be more susceptible to fraud attempts because of the more open admissions and the lower tuition rates. And because of the lower tuition rates, there tend to be more dollars that these fake students can get reimbursed for the student cost of living. And so that then becomes the payoff that people such as Ms. Halton case, ringleaders and others involved are able to divvy up. On this next slide, as I said, WCET does pay attention to these issues. So if your institution feels that you are vulnerable to cases such as this, these are some of the talking points that we have put out to our members to consider. So certainly don't confuse fraud with academic integrity. They obviously are entirely different. Suggestion to find out about what your current practices are by your registrar and your financial aid office. This might be an area where there might be a campus-wide conversation to find out, again, what your policies and practices are. I do know that the ACRO Association, the American Association of Collegiate Registrars and Admissions Officers, they've been tracking this issue as well, and actually have a fair number of resources that I would bet that your registrars are well familiar with. Suggestion that we've heard from our member institutions is to really take this on as a campus-wide issue. This is not just a problem for your online program, and it's not just a financial aid problem. It really does stretch across all units of the campus. Promoting good practice. Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to, this is Matt, I was just going to briefly insert an example at our institution at UMUC. We put together a fraud and compliance unit which brings together the registrar, IT, financial aid, the academic side, enrollment, advising, just across the board, and that kind of coordination is so important because what might look innocuous in one setting in another is recognized as a potential problem. So I just wanted to share that.
Right. Thank you for that, Matt. In terms of promoting good practices, just as Matt suggested, there are strategies that we have heard from institutions that really are looking at more from those administrative units, but also, in terms of even course design. I have here in the second bullet that I understand that there's a new tier that the department is going to require of institutions that maybe have had a track record of having been busted for some fraud activity on their campus, or or others where it's highly suspect, but where they are advising institutions to have tighter practices in terms of student proof of identity for students, whether they physically need to come in or provide multiple copies of photo IDs. As well as statements signed by the students of their purpose for enrolling in that campus. Early on in some of our WCT discussions, we talked about, and it was more about, it still is a financial aid issue, not so much a fraud, but of attendance. And when a student, you know, at what point does the campus determine that the student has dropped out of the class? And so from that conversations, there were a number of good practices that we heard about where many of the online programs are incorporating more active student engagement in the first week, the first 2 weeks, to really assess the level of student engagement. And so again, for some institutions, they are adding that as well to one of their places where they are monitoring student activity to determine if there are any potential problems. And then finally, the notion of like not everybody is, you know, as Matt said at the start here, many of your students are totally legitimate, working very hard, needing that financial aid, and so the caution of not putting in any additional barriers to legitimate students that are going to make it harder for them to seek an educational opportunities. Finally, I did want to just note that the Department of Ed is holding public hearings this month on some of these financial aid issues, as well as state authorization. WCT is active on both of those. My colleague Russ Poulin will be out at the public hearing next week in San Francisco, and he will be there to, in his 5 minutes of glory, have the opportunity to make the case that online students should not be restricted in receiving the same amount of tuition and coverage financially for living expenses that on-ground students may apply for. So it's just that, again, we don't like on an arbitrary basis to see huge differences in terms of policies with regard to a face-to-face class versus an online class. So that is the end of my section here. Do we want to take a minute to see if there's any questions? Okay, hearing none, I'd like to turn it over to Luke Dowden.
Thanks, Molly. I hope you can all hear me okay. I want to talk a little bit about authentication and academic integrity, and start that there are a set of guidelines that Molly's provided a slide on, and especially this Hallmark 9, that, you know, authentication is one form of evidence to demonstrate academic integrity, and of course there are others, and so there's some transitioning of the slides, so I'll pause and wait for that. But I'm going to. Yes, go ahead, Matt.
No, you can cover this. I thought I was covering the slide, but that's fine.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, just very briefly to help people distinguish authentication and academic integrity, because sometimes conversations using these terms get a little tend to conflate the terms. As Molly's comments indicated, the issue of identity authentication is much broader than academic integrity, but there is some overlap. And as a way to understand the overlap, I think it's helpful to look at the document, and this is listed in our sources slide at the end of the presentation. CRAC put together a document on guidelines for the evaluation of distance education, and it was adopted by 2011 by all the regional accreditors, and they had 9 hallmarks of quality in distance programs, and hallmark number 9 broadly concerned academic integrity. And under that, there were listed a number of ways that an institution could provide evidence of academic integrity. And one of those ways was through authentication. So there are other ways of demonstrating academic integrity, of course, but one is that having something in place. And what's quoted in the slide here, that the institution has in place effective procedures through which to ensure the student who registers in a distance education course or program is the same student who participates in and completes the course or program and receives the credit. This language is right out of the 2001 Higher Ed Act. And as that language went through the negotiated rulemaking process, what came out on the other side was that institutions would be in compliance with the regulation if they had simply secure username and password. However, also part of this was an understanding that as technology advanced, as costs for the technology went down, that institutions would study the use of technology for authenticating identity. Some of the other ways to authenticate included proctored exams, both face-to-face and electronic, and Luke's going to be telling us more about those in a moment. So that's just a very brief section to distinguish between authentication and academic integrity. And the next section, unless there are questions, is on trends in authentication and secure assessments.
There actually is a question. Meryl wants to know what is meant by a statement of educational purpose, and how would that detect an insincere or suspicious student?
Okay, I'm looking for that phrase. This is in the hallmark language.
Meryl, if you wanna just clarify, that would be helpful. I think it's from Molly's portion of the presentation.
Oh.
And what exactly is the question? I'm not seeing it. Is it in the chat or?
The question is, what is meant by a statement of educational purpose, and how would that detect an insincere or suspicious student?
I'm trying to think of if that was a word that I used, some words that I used. You might be referring then to what, to the, I see, it's the statement of educational purpose refers to the fact that that the student needs to make a statement or verify that they are there to either earn a degree, to pursue a credit, to advance their educational credentials. So it's just really a matter of having the student make that statement very evident. Does that help? I know in some institutions, for example, if students are taking a non-credit class, that there would be different procedures that would be that they would implement with those students. So it's for the credit-seeking students that they need to make that statement.
There's a follow-up question.
Okay.
Do institutions require that educational purpose statement now?
I'm aware of a couple that have done that, where they are reevaluating their campus policies to address this issue of fraud. And in those cases, that some of those are institutions that have had some incidences that they've needed to address. It's not required for every institution. I can go back and find the language in the Department of Education rules, but it is for those institutions where they may have had some problems in the past, and they and it's just another layer of assurance that and steps that the institution needs to take, or as recommended by the Department of Ed. So it's not a blanket new procedure that applies to all institutions. That's my understanding.
Okay, great, thank you.
Well, for the sake of time, I'm going to transition us to a little bit of a discussion about trends in authentication and secure assessments. And a lot of the observations that we're going to share in the next set of slides with you came from our work with the Academic Integrity and Student Authentication Common Interest Group within WCET. There's an entire website, and I think Emily's going to share that with you, and there's some links at the end that have our resources and document the work that's been done. I hope that you can hear me okay. I've adjusted my headset, and so I'll depend on Emily and to let me know if there are any sound or audio issues. And I'll transition to the next slide. I want to talk to you first about trends that we observed in promoting student authentication. And so I felt like I had returned to my days as an undergraduate history major and collecting oral histories for the year that Molly and Matt and others interviewed people across the United States from all different types of institutions about what they were doing to address student authentication. And generally, people were doing or engaged in one of three types of activities. They had found a way to incorporate challenge questions, and those are questions that are implemented through a learning management system or through a testing software that would ask you personal information that's collected from the web through a data warehousing service that only you would know the answer to. For instance, challenge question for me was, which of these addresses have you lived at? And it was one of the many places I lived at during my undergraduate college career. Some of the latest, the other things that we saw being used were, I think it's an evolving technology, is things that use biometrics. So this click and keystroke technology, and I put a company name there that solicits my business often as a director of distance learning, and so it's, again, a system that's integrated with your learning management system that monitors how how your keystroking and your clicking habits. And so I would encourage you to do some research on that product. And then there's a full suite product by Software Secure that's a hardware-software solution that has biometric fingerprinting and photoing built in, as well as a 360-degree camera and a motion detection. And so those are all ways that we saw institutions trying to authenticate that the people taking their courses and their high-stakes assessments were achieving what the Higher Ed Reauthorization Act has charged us to do. Now, I want to be clear that WCET, nor myself, Molly, or Matt are endorsing any of these products. We've just put them up here as a point of discussion and for, just to get you to think about items or approaches that you might want to consider in student authentication. We also noted some trends in promoting secure assessments. And so to try to address the issue of academic integrity and to create an environment that supports that, and to also address student authentication at the same time, we've seen a movement to synchronous proctoring, and typically in two types. One is virtual proctoring, and there are lots of companies. I've probably in the past 2 years been solicited by 4 companies total. My university uses one company mainly for our virtual proctoring. We don't require it of our faculty members. It is one of the options that we provide to them. And then we spent a good amount of time, and Molly, I want to make sure I give a lot of credit to the consortium of college testing centers, because we engaged in some dialogue with them about promoting location-based proctoring for people that are not comfortable opening up their webcams to a proctor, but want to find a location-based, or for an institution that requires a physical location for proctoring. And so we spent some time in conversations with the NCTA, and that's the National Centers for Testing. Some models that we also saw in proctoring, and one that my university used to create its own proctoring policy was from University of West Florida. I was very impressed with the work that they had done. They have a very options-based policy. In other words, and we were experiencing this problem at my university. Faculty members were saying, you know, I want to give tests online, but I want some security around it, and I think proctoring may be a way that I can put security and protect the integrity of my exam or my assignment that I'm placing a lot of points on. But I don't know what my options are. I don't know what my options are, and I continue to hear that. And so University of West Florida gave us permission to use their policy as a base to develop our own policy. The other system approach to proctoring is something we've heard, and I believe, Molly, the slides or the recording of this is available through the resources on the WCET website. The University of North Carolina system has an entire network that they've created on their own among their 17 campuses of proctoring sites. And so we've heard about that impressive network that's been in place and is coordinated at the system level. And so I'll stop and see if Matt, you or Molly have anything to add on promoting secure assessments, because I know you all are a part of the group that were interviewing the institutions and different people in the roles of proctoring around the nation.
The only thing that I would add to your comments, Luke, and maybe you already referred to it, is that from those interviews that we conducted, that institutions wanted to provide options, and whether it be location-based or virtual, and options both for the students as well as options for the faculty. Matt, what would you add?
I would just reiterate the same thing, that institutional culture, a concern with access for students, that those are really key. And so, you know, in our interviews, we just got a sense of there really is no one size fits all, and there are a diversity of approaches.
Yeah, and obviously, you know, one of the drivers is that for so many of your online programs, enrollments are just continuing to grow, and for some institutions, looking at some of these other options was just a matter of not being able to handle the volume. For example, at their own college-based testing center, and needing to provide some more options for students.
Thanks, Matt and Molly. So again, these were some trends we observed in promoting secure assessments. And I'm going to turn it over to Matt. He's going to discuss a little bit what we think is a real emerging response, an innovative response to this question of student authentication and academic integrity. So Matt, you're going to discuss with us about trends in promoting authentic assessments.
Sure. Just a little background. The experience at my institution several years ago, I think maybe around 2007, 2008, we were requiring that every online course administer a proctored final exam. And at that time, they were all face-to-face proctored exams. And that was when we began piloting some of the earlier forms of electronic proctoring. But at the same time, we formed a campus-wide group pulling academics from all the different disciplines, people involved in testing centers. We looked at the proctored exam and the role of the proctored exam. And we were in a situation where we were giving some, in our stateside division, not counting the overseas, some 30,000 proctored exams every semester, and a lot of them in state of Maryland, and about 10,000 sites around the country. So part of it was just sort of a practical issue for us. The other was thinking about the role of assessment in general, and we had a number of conversations, some of them very heated, some of them involving many different perspectives from different disciplines about moving away from the requirement for proctored exams. And one of the ways that some of us conceptualized different forms of assessment were, with recordings, that the real audio files still like analog because it is richer. The problem is it's difficult to break into pieces, to distribute, to do all the kinds of things that we like to do with digital files. And similarly, in assessment, the forms of assessment we've inherited, the big exam, the big paper, those are great experiences for students, and they learn a lot certainly by preparing for those and doing those. But there are some disadvantages, and those tend to be the assessment events that have the biggest issues of academic misconduct. So what we move to in most of our programs, I would say, instead of final exams, forms of authentic assessment. So these are assessments driven by the outcomes for the course and the outcomes for the program. They're often project-based, real-world kinds of activities, team-based activities. They're staged over time. They have milestones. They're iterative. You can't get to a further stage unless you've done the previous stages. So it's not impossible to cheat in those, but it becomes more and more difficult to do so. One of the advantages of digital forms of assessment are that opportunities for feedback to students are much more frequent. A student getting feedback throughout the semester. The other is that with a lot of the technologies that are now available, learner analytics, for example, and forms of interactive self-assessment for students, there are more and more ways that you can bake into the class, as it were, opportunities for assessment and feedback more frequently, faster. And academic integrity in this sense is not a one-time event, but it's really the entire system. It's the whole progress of the student throughout the course. So it was a different way of approaching the issue, and I would add that we still do have disciplines like mathematics, for example, that for good reasons want to maintain proctored final exams, and so we are looking at both face-to-face and electronic proctoring for those instances.
Thanks, Matt. I think Molly had placed a question in the chat box for you to respond to. Molly, am I okay to progress to the next?
Yeah, and I think Matt did address it there as he was just talking about the mathematics versus the writing and portfolio. So I think we should move on.
Okay.
Sound good?
Right. And so one of the final topics that Matt and Molly and I wanted to talk to you about was this idea of supporting students and faculty and fostering academic integrity. It gets back to a point that Molly made earlier about finding the balance between setting up a culture where a student feels like they're accused rather than a culture that you want where people feel
invested in the process of ensuring that there's academic integrity. And so we're going to spend just a few minutes discussing this item. One of the things that we'll share with you through WCET is a set of questions from a survey that I do every summer with faculty at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. The title of the survey is Use of Technology in Teaching and Learning, and there's a section I begin to include about academic integrity. So as I learned more about the topic, I began to examine my own assumptions about academic integrity and what I believe that faculty thought and knew about it, and what I believe that students thought and knew about the issue. And so I began to ask questions in a formal way. And so we're going to share that question set with you in case you want to ask those similar questions to your faculty. I think it'll be eye-opening for you. You'll begin to understand how much your faculty and your culture understands what academic integrity is, what systems or policies or processes are in place. And so I would strongly encourage you to check your own assumptions. I think you'll be maybe pleasantly or unpleasantly surprised to confirm what you believe, or to find areas that you might can address through some level of professional development. So I would suggest, and our presentation team, that you start to think about adopting policies and finding ways to measure your success. WCET has done some extensive work on student authentication. There's a best practices document that we've provided a link to, and that document is a great base for you to use to think about structuring your policy. Your accreditation agencies may have made very firm comments and stands on these issues. If you do visit the WCET page, you'll see that the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, the chair was invited to give a guest blog post on this issue. And so if you're in a SACS school or at an institution that's accredited by SACS, you can get some direct insight about the thinking of that accrediting agency. Again, I mentioned earlier, I really like the University of West Florida model. If you're stuck in that mode of having faculty ask you, give me a good example of proctoring, or give me some options, I found that their model and their policy is very effective and easy to use and easy to understand. I would just encourage you to ask their permission to use it if you plan to take it and start to build your own. And then you'll need to think about the metrics that you're going to put in place to measure your policy. Is it working? And are the things that you're doing to educate students working? And Matt referenced some approaches earlier, but are the number of people on my survey that report that they are unaware that there's an academic integrity policy going down? That might be a metric that's important to me, that I raise awareness, and the way I measure that is through the survey that is heavily responded to during the summer, if you can imagine that. And then
next one, Luke.
Sure. Finally, it's important to take an approach that involves educating people about academic integrity. And back to the whole idea of assumptions, not assuming that everyone views academic integrity the same way, or that they define it the same way. But one of the items that we've looked heavily at, and I was responding to some of the comments in the chat a little earlier, was embedding it in your course design, including honor statements. And to me, honor statements are an awareness tool. They're not an enforcement tool. They may be used in your enforcement of some policy, but they're much more about awareness and educating people. There are some tutorials. We're very fortunate that Colorado Community Colleges Online, and Molly, I think you included this in our list of resources, has some tutorials for not only students but for faculty. And you might create and embed tutorials into courses or into some initial online orientation. And we saw a few weeks ago in our common interest group this Trusted Seal program through the International Center for Academic Integrity. And we've got a little information on that in our resources. So if you've got a course and you're concerned that it may be vulnerable to someone that's not going to be fully honest about how they complete whatever assignments or exams, maybe you want to take it through the Trusted Seal program. And so I'll stop there. And Molly, is there anything you or Matt want to add here about the importance of embedding this in course design?
I think that certainly is the practice over and over that we have seen, that is by far an important thing to do. You know, effectiveness, I don't know, but the importance of it for sure. And just a word briefly on the Trusted Seal program. I know that we have 2 individuals who are on the webcast here today who are involved directly in that program. We had Tricia Bertram-Gallant join us in a web conference a couple weeks ago, and she's directly involved with the International Center for Academic Integrity, and it's at that point that she had mentioned this new program. It is a new program, and so I think if you're interested, I would suggest that you go to the ICAI site to learn more. But it's a new partnership between the Center and Software Secure.
And the last point I want to make is about supporting faculty in the reporting process. The best quote I heard from one of my nursing faculty teaching in an accelerated online program was, well, once we're aware of it, we have to do something about it. And she was talking about the reference of academic misconduct. And I think with faculty, the preference that I hear often is, well, I'll take care of it through my grading policy. When there may be another set of expectations on faculty to report academic misconduct through some student code of conduct process. And so if a faculty member understands that secondary option for them, you'll need to set expectations about that reporting and that it does take time. But that we should also encourage faculty to formally report. And I never really considered the substance of this until Molly's supervisor shared a story about the 2 twins. And with respect to Molly, who has 2 twins, the story goes a little like this. There were 2 brothers that all signed up for the same courses, and one would study for one class's assessments or exams, and the other would study for the other courses, and they would essentially split the work. These 2 students had been caught twice, and on the 3rd time, the faculty member thought, well, I'll just take care of it through the grade, and I'll give the students both failing grades, and but then decided to pursue the reporting process with the institution and found that this was a repeated behavior pattern. And sometimes reporting beyond or handling it beyond your course is good for the entire institution's integrity outside of just your course's integrity. So I'll offer you the 2 twins story to kind of help frame that comment. And finally, the other role that I've found myself in that I'm comfortable because of my training at the graduate level is really preparing faculty when their decisions are appealed. So a faculty member does not send a student through the student code of conduct chain and says, I will deal with the student through my grading policy, and the student appeals the grading policy. And so what happens when a student appeals the decision handled through grading that's in response to cheating or some other form of academic misconduct, and then a committee of the faculty members and students' peers overturns the faculty member's academic decision. And so I found myself recently coaching faculty on, well, what was your argument during the appeal, and how did you make your case, and how did you frame this? And so I think that there's some unintended consequences of raising awareness at all levels, and we should be prepared for that as well. And I think that takes us to the end of our presentation, and I know that we wanted to make some time for questions, and so I'll pause here, and Molly, I don't know if you wanted to share a few of the resources.
Should we see if there's questions here first, Luke? Questions to your recent presentation here, your slides?
Definitely.
We actually have a question on the phone from Stacy. So Stacy, you are unmuted and you can talk and ask your question.
Okay, I don't know if you can hear me because I'm on cell phone now. Is it possible for you to hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, the Trusted Seal. I was so happy that you were able to bring up something with regard to the 2 twin story, because I was wondering how, integrity could be maintained between, an individual versus having another person, doing their work for them while, basically just the two twin story, you know, how one was doing two courses while the other one was studying for another two. You know, I was wondering how the integrity could be maintained, you know, for one individual who was, how persons within the school system could figure out how a student was able to be as trustworthy as possible in whatever they were doing. You know, the trusted seal thing that I see you promoting, I was wondering about that. You know, could you expound on it? Is there a particular way in which you can prove, you know, that persons are being trustworthy in their studies generally?
Well,
Holly?
Go ahead, Luke.
So in my former life, I was a dean at a community college, and I had a faculty member that was obsessed with cheating, with preventing cheating. And through lots of good discussions, Stacy and others with his colleagues, one of the realizations that he came to is that, you know, was he creating an environment in his courses, face-to-face or online, where he was encouraging cheating? In other words, could he assess more frequently? So it would benefit the students, smaller chunks of information, more frequent assessments, or were there authentic assessments where it wasn't tied to specific content, but to the application of the content, again, where possible, you know, as Matt acknowledged earlier. And so I was very pleased to see the faculty member design his courses in a way that it would have been more work for the student to cheat than to actually do the work. And so I always go back to that that example, and I hope that is an acceptable example for you, an acceptable response to what you were asking, because it really showed the faculty member that took ownership for the environment that he created. Whether you would agree with that or not, that's I think a separate discussion, but it led to some innovations in his instructional delivery, and that's what really excited me. So I'll stop and see if others have comments.
And I just want to add to what Luke is saying, and, you know, and again, Stacy, in all of our conversations, you know, this idea, and I'm reminded of some of the slides that we had when we had Tricia from the Academic Center for Integrity, you know, a slide that says, how do we stop students from cheating, with the big red X through it? But instead, we need to be asking the question of, how do we ensure that students are learning? And, you know, our goal as educators is to focus on student success. We're not out there necessarily policing everything that's happening. Certainly the fraud thing is different, but looking at ways that you as a faculty member can design your courses so that, one, you are focusing on those assessments that help you understand if your students are in fact learning, and have that be more of the high bar that you are trying to reach.
Okay. Can you hear me still?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm satisfied with your answers. You know, I was just thinking that teacher that you're saying is was capable of asking different questions that were able to prevent cheating from taking place. Suppose there are other teachers who aren't able to do that same thing. You know, how do you gauge, you know, how they're able to prevent cheating versus that one teacher that was able to? If you understand
shall we move on? Thank you, Stacy.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you for your comments. Shall we move on and just do a quick, let me just share with you all what we have in terms of a few. Stacy, I think you need to mute your phone. We're getting some feedback, or maybe Emily can take away the audio privilege there. Thank you. So we just wanted to share with some of you, some of this is kind of a collective compilation, and again, just some selected resources for you all to take back. In a very selfish way, I'll point to the one there at the bottom, which has gone into the chat log about the best practices document to promote academic integrity produced by WCET. And I can say one thing that we're particularly proud of with that work produced by our members is that all of the regional accrediting associations in their sections of their guidelines that address distance education, they refer to that as a useful resource. So please check that out. It's Creative Commons there for you to use. Additional resources, just as Luke noted, the Florida policy for proctoring, I listed a couple of other institutions that you might want to take a look at. The University of Arkansas as a system, they just very recently in the last year or two did a major campus-wide look at academic integrity. I think that they have a very nice website. They have a publication there of their rubrics. Take a look at the newsletters that they send out to students and to faculty alike. It's a brand new initiative, but it's one that came from the provost level, and it's being and it still is a work in progress, I think that they would say. But I think that is a nice that's a nice set of resources to take a look at. And then also UC San Diego, we've mentioned Tricia Bertram-Gallant, and as we were talking earlier, their campus is fortunate to have a designated office of academic integrity, and so therefore it's easier to have those resources. They're very available for faculty and students alike to tackle this issue. We've mentioned a couple times CCC Online. Those are a couple of these tutorials. Take a look at those. And Tricia does a blog on cheating in school. And then Luke did also mention North Carolina's system-wide proctoring system, and that too is, I think that's only been in place for maybe a half a year. So we hope that those resources are helpful to you. And here is contact information for your presenters from today, and I know I can speak for myself here that I welcome any contact from any of you offline. Luke, Matt, do you want to make some other closing comments here?
Matt, I'll let you go first.
No, except that it's been a pleasure as always working with my colleagues Molly and Luke, and I'm looking at all the questions that are popping up in the chat, and it's really rich. So thank you to all the participants and your comments.
And again, I want to thank WCET for my involvement, and also Learning House for hosting this. I already put this in the chat. My goal is, for any time I'm a participant in a webinar, is to walk away with at least one or two new things that I can share with others. And so feel free to contact any of us. I know I'm happy to share the little bit that I know and learn from you as well. And so again, I just want to thank you for the opportunity.
And this is Emily from Learning House. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, Luke, Molly, and Matt, for sharing your knowledge with us. Just to let you all know, we will be emailing these slides out. So if you haven't had a chance to copy down all the links, you will receive those. And we are actually having another webinar in July, which will be releasing the data from our annual online college student survey. And we are having a annual conference, Connect 2013, and Luke Dowden will be speaking at it. So if you want to hear So if you want to hear him in person, we welcome you to join us here in beautiful Louisville, Kentucky.
Emily, this is Molly, and I have a question. As part of sending people the archive to the webcast and the slides, will you be doing any kind of polling from the chat, any of the comments or suggestions in terms of any kind of summary way?
I certainly can. that is completely possible. And we also will have a recording up on learninghouse.com within about a week. So we can save the chat and have that be available as well.
Well, Emily and Luke and Matt, and to all of you who participated today, you know, again, for myself, this is that thank you for letting us join you, and I just have such a great time working with Luke and Matt. So we need to kind of package this, guys, and kind of do a road show or something, huh?
I'm up for it.
So Emily, Right. Well, anyway, thank you all. Please contact us if there's any questions, and everybody have a great day.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, y'all. Have a good day.